a Sapphire Running Zone podcast.
Hi, this is Tim from Sapphire Running Zone, and I am joined today on another of our Runner Stories podcasts by Adam, who's just run the Belfast Marathon. Now, Adam didn't do things particularly by the book, so we're going to have a little chat and see what was done by the book and what wasn't, and is it recommended? Right, Adam, welcome. Why did you decide to do the Belfast Marathon in the first place?
It was, I was out for dinner with some friends and they said they were doing the Belfast Marathon, and I just joined along with them and just said, oh, I'll do it with you, and signed up there and then at the dinner table.
When was that?
That was, I'd say, late November.
Late November. When did you start your training?
March. It was March when I'd originally started training.
Right, so March, and the race was in the first week of May. So you gave yourself, 6 weeks?
Yeah, about 6 weeks.
Yeah, right, okay. So as everyone knows, the ideal marathon training program is a 16 to 20 week schedule. So Adam's done his in 6 weeks. Now, give us a bit of your fitness background, Adam, as to how you managed to do this, and we'll go through bits and pieces of it on the way through.
Well, I've been competitive swimming for probably, not as much at the moment, but for probably the last 20 years. The way my training schedule would have been in the region of 15 to 20 hours a week in the pool through varying times, obviously a mix of gym. Predominantly I was a sprint swimmer, so short bursts, but obviously when you're in the pool you do a lot of steady aerobic work as well, and that's been sort of my life really. So being able to sort of get out and do a run, quite a significant run, was not easy on the legs, but on the heart and the aerobic system, obviously I've done quite a lot in the past, which has enabled me to sort of get away with such a short training period.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, this, because if anybody of average to below average fitness was to say, right, I'm going to do a marathon with 6 weeks of training, and probably, am I right to say, not massively intense 6 weeks, fairly relaxed? I mean, what was your longest run?
My longest run was half marathon. That was my longest. And that was about 3 weeks out.
Yeah, so for most people that would be a complete no-no. That whole sort of truncated program, a relatively short long run. But you've been able to do that because of your fitness background. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
I think for most people who think that they can run a marathon with a 6 week training program would be totally unadvisable. But I think in your case, because of your fitness background, it is possible. I think whenever we talk about how long does it take to train for a marathon, the normal response would be 16 to 20 weeks. But it does obviously depend on background. And that's what's so interesting here, the fact that you have been able to do what is a very significant road race in a good time. So tell it, just remind me of your time.
It was 3 hours, 59 minutes, 15 seconds, I think.
That's a really good time. And that's the kind of time that someone of average fitness who had trained for 4 or 5 months would be absolutely delighted with that time. So the fact you've been able to do that off the back of a long run of 13 miles and 6 weeks of training, but bearing in mind the taper is 3 weeks, in effect, you've done 3 weeks of training, which is, amazing, to be perfectly honest. So I'm intrigued to know what you did. So just talk us through when you did your first run and what those 6 weeks looked like before the marathon.
The first run was 7.8k. I remember running and thinking, was this a mistake? And, it was a fairly steady run. And then the week, I think I did one shorter run towards the end of the week. And then the week after, I started to step it up. So I did a 10k the week after. Towards the back end of the week, I went to about 12, 13k. The idea was just to sort of see what I could do at that moment in time and just push it, but keep the pace quite intense. Then the week after, again, I did some shorter runs, some like 4 or 5k runs in between, but I was quite limited by daylight. So when I was out running, I'd go straight after work. We're still in that period in March where the sun it was before daylight savings. The sun set, quite early. So trying to fit something in the country lanes where I live was quite tricky. And then it was about week 3, 4, I managed to get in a half marathon, which originally I was targeting a 30k run, but I got to about, must have been about 19k in, and I thought this is particularly hard, and had to slow right down. I was averaging about 5:15 a kilometre across the whole thing, which was fairly quick, but it was. That was a really hard run. I remember finishing that thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this marathon in 3 weeks' time, because it was tough, to the point I had to ring my mum up and say, Mum, can you just take me home, because I can't actually get back home because I'd ran too far away. I went out with all the best intentions, but the ankles and the hips were just not liking it that particular day. Interestingly, I didn't go out with any water or gels or anything really for that run, so that was probably, in hindsight, not the best idea, because I actually think I possibly could have finished it off if I had the right fuel for that kind of a run. I guess I didn't go out with a target. It was more sort of like a run until I feel like I can't. Then after that week, started to step it down a little bit. So I think I did about 40k the week before, running wise, and then dropped down to about 28, I think, on that week. I think it was 3 weeks out. Then went to Italy away for a holiday, it gave me a great chance to carb load. But the running was obviously very different. So it was like coastal running, and it was quite hilly. So it was, whilst I didn't run that much in terms of distance, it was a much harder run in terms of your heart and what I was trying to do on those runs. So I think I did probably about 15 to 20k that week, which again, just given the nature of the run and it being quite hilly, was quite difficult. Then the week leading up to the marathon, I was a bit concerned about a bruise that I got on my shin. So I think I did 5k at the start of the week, and I thought, no, I need to just rest now for the rest of the week. So rested up into the marathon. I think was the right thing to do, given the position my body was in at the time. Obviously, if I was to do it differently this time, I'd have it would have been over a much longer period, because it was quite intense and quite tricky.
Well, yeah, I mean, normally if you do marathon training, you have at least 3 weeks. Your longest run is 3 weeks out from race day, and that 3 weeks then is a gradual wind down of all the training you've done. But obviously you hadn't really done a lot, so you were still, basically, your goal was really pretty much to run as much as you could up to race day, whereas of course your body would have been absolutely shattered anyway. Absolutely staggered that you've done so well given the lack of training. So let's just rewind a little bit and talk a bit more about your background, because I think it's important for anyone listening to this to understand that this is not the way that you do it. Adam's been able to do this because of his inherent fitness levels from many, many, many years of intense training. So it just shows what the body is capable of doing, and the fact, of course, he's not 70. So give us your age, Adam, and tell us how long you were, when you started intense training and what that consisted of.
So I'm 30 now, just turned 30. Intense training for me started, I guess, I'd argue from the age of 11. That was when it really started to ramp up. Like, I was quite active as a younger kid, but probably the age of 11 all the way through to, I'd argue, lockdown was pretty intense training. I don't think, generally I wouldn't drink, I wouldn't really go out much. Training was just pretty much everything I did. Would have been, in my peak when I was at university, it would have been probably 25 hours a week of training. But in general, it would have been around, and that included the gym, generally it would have been around 15 to 20. So you'd be swimming, let's say, myself as a sprinter would be swimming probably about 35 to 40k a week. And that'd be in the pool, obviously not running. So, and it's a different kettle of fish when you're swimming, because you're swimming without oxygen. Obviously you breathe, but it's not quite the same as when you've got the ability to breathe in and out freely. And that really does help and that was how I sort of attacked the marathon on race day as well, was essentially just trying to keep my heart rate down.
That was a deliberate plan then for your race day strategy, as it were. Your goal was to keep your heart rate down because that's what you were used to doing.
Yeah, it was, the goal was to try and keep it low. I wanted to keep it at around the 140, 150 mark. I didn't have any running watches or anything fancy like that. It was more just a matter of, I know what it feels like. Let's see what I can do, and just make sure that I don't get overexcited. Because I know when I'm in those upper zones, so it's just about keeping down low. And just, the main point for me was trying to get to the half marathon point and make it feel not easy, but easy. Because in like, right, I've done that. And that was a lot easier than it was in training, right? Go now onto the back half. So it was very much having not known much about running technique or anything like that, it was very much a matter of, right, let's just keep the heart rate low, keep yourself calm, and keep the pace low, which was the advice given to me by many people. Don't go out too fast because you'll just blow up at the end.
Yeah, talk a bit more about managing your heart rate then, because this is something I think a lot of runners don't do. But was this a significant issue for you when you were swimming then?
I think, obviously, being a sprinter, it didn't really matter. You don't breathe. It's completely hypoxic. You're off and you go, and it's a 30-second race. But whenever I was doing any sort of distance swimming, it was quite important to make sure that you're breathing constantly. So, which sounds stupid, obviously, but when a lot of people swim, they hold the breath when their face is in the water, and that's just a no-go. So one of the key things I was doing whilst I was running was just making sure that the inhalation and the exhale, like the inhale and the exhale, was essentially the same and it was uniform every single time. To just make sure that I'd got a steady rhythm and I wasn't getting over panicked. And my breathing's normally what I'd use to sort of manage my heart rate, because I know what it's like. If your heart rate is too high, you do just blow up. And that was one thing I was very, very keen to prove a few people wrong, that I wasn't going to, that I wasn't a point. Keeping my heart rate low and calm was quite important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what about the mental side of the race? I mean, how did the swimming help you with the mental side of running that distance? Presumably, an hour, 2-hour training session in a pool when all you're seeing is the bottom of a swimming pool is not particularly easy. And mental strength is a big part of that.
Yeah, the mental strength of the ball, the staring at a black line for hours and hours on end definitely helped when it came to running that length of time. What does help is obviously surroundings are changing. Not that I really took them in very much. I was very much in my own little world, but it definitely did help, just because I've got this ability now to be able to just switch off and almost just think about two things, whether that be foot placement on the road, heart rate, breathing. And they were the only three things I was really thinking about. So in terms of actually realizing or recognizing much else, it's hard to describe. It's like a flow state. You just hit a rhythm and it's just like one foot in front of the other and you're just thinking about the rhythm, the tapping of your feet on the road. And I just find it really easy to sort of switch into that. But the bit that's difficult is when everything starts to get a little bit tough. It's like towards the end, in my head, it's just that battle of, I just want to prove everyone wrong.
Yeah, so for you then, the way you got through a challenge of this magnitude with very, very minimal training was almost a mind over matter situation. And because you were mentally so strong from all that swimming training, you probably didn't take in a massive amount of what was going on race day then. I mean, give us your sort of recollections of the day. Where did the race start? What landmarks do you remember on the way around? What were the crowds like? That kind of thing.
It started on Stormont Estate, which is spectacular. Really, really lovely backdrop. Obviously took quite a lot of that in. Beyond that, I remember a lake. In terms of the roads, I remember the hills, because I was thinking these inclines are just not stopping. The crowds were unbelievable. I was actually quite surprised at how many people were on the roads. That was one thing, the only thing really that I actually took in was the crowds, the kids on the road handing out sweets, people giving water, people clapping you along. That was really quite, I expected it just to be a big marathon thing, because I've never done a marathon before. I expected that just to be, it's just in London when you get the big crowds. And Belfast was actually, it surprised me. But in terms of landmarks and things, honestly, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you what I ran past. I couldn't even tell you the street. I might recognise it if I went back round again, but I was so focused on what my body was doing. I honestly just didn't take anything in. I think the crowds and the oranges on the side of the road, when people hold out the oranges and you take on a bit of the orange segments and you chuck it away, they were the best bits, because they came at just the right time and you really, really needed it.
It's quite interesting though that you could be that focused, literally one foot in front of the other, that you've not really absorbed anything about the race at all, and that probably is because you were so focused on finishing, because you knew your training was light, and you almost went in there with a different mental mindset probably than a lot of other runners.
Yeah, it was a matter of don't mess it up. Was the mindset I sort of went in for, and I think that sort of reflected in the time I did as well. The back half of my marathon was a lot faster than the front, And I think that was just through pure fear of not really knowing what was coming.
That again is, I mean, it's very unusual to get a negative split, because most people obviously push themselves harder in that first half and then just almost run out of gas in the second half. What did you do about nutrition? I presume that you did. What did you take any gels? Did you train with gels?
Yeah, I took some gels on the day, and I had some bits of sweets when I was running around. The day before, I went with my friend and his partner, and we had so much pizza, pastry bits, just carb loaded essentially. In terms of training, I think the nutrition on the training wasn't very good at all. I'd literally get home from work having not eaten, drank, and I'd just get out the door because I just needed to beat the sun going down. I didn't train with any gels in training, but I do think I paid the price for it. And I was incredibly bloated at the end of the marathon. And I think, well, I did have 3 gels on the way around. I don't know whether that probably was something to do with it. Having seen how I was at the end of the marathon, I'd definitely train with them next time.
You were very likely to have got bloated because you just hadn't trained, not just with gels, but you hadn't trained with the specific gel that they offer on that course. I mean, there's 2 things. If you train with gels, that's great, but you need to change. You need to train with the gels that they give out, or you take your own with you. And I think that's quite common. You're almost, well, you're lucky you didn't have an adverse stomach reaction on the course, because that obviously can be incredibly embarrassing. Did you wear headphones?
Yes. I had headphones, and I had the feedback from my Strava just telling me what speed the last kilometre was. And I knew that if I was going faster than a 5:30, I was getting overexcited. So I was tinkering around 5:45 a kilometre for the most part. In the last sort of 6 or 7k, dropped down to about, I think it was about 4:30 a kilometre, which was quite a big drop. Which sort of shows that you did any experience on the pacing side of things. But as for the music, I like to listen to quite repetitive, lyricless songs. Just to sort of, I don't know, just go around at the right kind of pace. It would be like electronic, just as I'm going around, just to try and keep a beat going as I'm running. I just queued a load of songs, and some of them I queued about 6 times in a row because I knew I'd want to hear it a few times in a row. It was the kind of playlist that would probably drive most people insane. But I've got, whenever I'm doing like work at work and I'm trying to focus, I'll put the same song on loop for about 6 hours, So having something that's just there in the background but doesn't distract me too much from what I'm doing was quite important. So if I played too fast a song, or the mood was changing too much, I don't think I'd be able to focus properly on the race.
What about fundraising? Did you do any fundraising? Because you did it with some friends, and did they fundraise?
They did a fundraiser for a Down syndrome charity. And that was their whole reason for doing it in the first instance. I didn't fundraise this time, just because I sort of knew that I wouldn't be able to put in the effort that was required to do it well. So, like, if I was doing a fundraiser for it, I'd like to have put in a good solid training. It doesn't feel like, I don't know, it's tricky to put it into words exactly, but I just felt like I didn't want to fundraise for something that I wasn't fully committed for. I mean, I was committed to getting around the course, but in terms of the actual build up to the race, I just didn't feel like I would do it justice, if that makes sense.
What would be your tips for any debutantes without your level of fitness who were thinking of taking a marathon on with such limited training? Please say don't do it.
Yeah, it wouldn't be definitely don't do it. If I was to do it again, I'd probably go a little bit more than 20 weeks, to be honest. I'd probably really want to be training for probably the best part of a year to give it a good proper go at. I think anyone who's got no background in fitness, I do feel should have done what my friend did, which was start in November. Never done anything sort of like very athletic, if you get what I mean. He did it in 4 hours 25, I think it was.
Which is a really respectable time for someone on a 20-week program. He must have been pretty annoyed at you, wasn't he?
I think they knew I was going to be quicker. And I think it comes from that. They're not. He's not like not sporty, but he's not. There's a difference between doing, in my opinion, there's a difference between doing a bit of football and a bit of cricket and a bit of rugby versus doing an athletic sport, like whether it be a cyclist or a runner or swimming or even gymnastics is quite intense. I think there's a bit of a difference between those sports that are quite demanding in terms of the hours you've got to put in the week versus, footballers obviously need to be fit, but it's just not quite the same as like when you're training for like a more athletic sport, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And that's what makes this podcast so fascinating, is the fact that you're able to produce a time like that off such a limited training program, but you're coming off the base of someone who's trained at an elite level for the best part of 20 years. It takes a certain mindset, and obviously you have a level of fitness which enables you to do that. And average sort of, I'm slightly fit, I do a bit of football and cricket, doesn't really, I'm not saying it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but you still need to do a 20-week training program minimum. And if you haven't done the training, race day is grim. Now, you were fortunate because your race day wasn't grim because you have got that level of fitness, and that's what makes this so interesting. So what are your plans now then? Are you going to do one and train extensively?
I think I'd like to. I'd like to do it just to see what's actually possible. I do think I could do 3.5 hours. I think that's in my head where I always thought I could be with it. I'd like to do it a little bit lighter as well, because I was my heaviest when I actually did the run. I don't think I've ever been as heavy as I was, which was another concern going into the event. So I think my approach in that first part of the race is what really saved me. Because I was like, I just need to go at least a minute slower than what I'd normally run at if I was training. And that was sort of how I got through it. But yeah, I'd love to give it another go and actually see if I can, do it properly.
I think you've clearly got potential to go a lot quicker than 3.5, to be honest. And if you did a proper training program, let's keep in touch, and we'll follow your progress, and hopefully have another conversation when you're about to get on the start line of your next marathon. Thank you very much for joining us.
All right, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this Sapphire Running Zone podcast. Keep checking back as we have lots more podcasts coming soon.